every year.
There's a total disconnect now between the ruling group and the masses.
I hate psychology.
Clear out.
They're the same worm-like characters.
Analysts.
Fuck you with your stupid argument.
They should not bother us.
Democracy.
All of this just works.
Vote for the generations who are coming.
Fully dynamic game engine.
A millennial video essayist.
All support, strength,
Constant craving.
and identity.
I haven't yearned.
They are a disease of our time.
Clear them out. You're voting for what your grandfather and father fought for.
I sit and yearn.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of The Longhouse. A 5 minutes late episode, and this time it's actually all my fault. So I see you all in the chat calling us out. It's good. We have to keep the punctuality level high, and this week I failed you. With us, as usual, we have Luddic Path. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing well, thank you. So yeah, good evening to the Euros and good morning to the Ameripros. And yeah, thanks for taking accountability. You're showing a great Scandinavian example there. Right, so then we have reoccurring guest and writer with us here, Dissident Nomad, or just Nomad. How are you doing, sir?
Hello, yeah, good to be here from over the other end of the North Sea.
Taking some time off from appearing on much bigger shows than ours to slum it here with us.
Oh, good to be back. Good to be back. Yeah, one time you come. I think the last time was the Christmas one, I think.
Oh yeah, you appeared on that. That's true.
Yeah.
But before that, it's been a while since you've done an episode like this with us, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it was it? I'm thinking it was Nixon, but I'm not sure.
It must have been Nixon.
It
Yeah.
might have been Nixon, yeah, which is a good one. Or was it
like-
Reagan?
I think it was Reagan actually.
Reagan, yeah.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah. A lot has
So-
happened in clown world since then. So.
Oh Jesus, it feels ages ago.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Good to be back. Yeah.
Yes. Now, you have done a couple of shows about some of the topics we're going to talk about, and you have done a couple of articles, so we'll try to sort of cover this in a way that, for your sake, Nomad, isn't too much repetition.
Sure.
But it's hard not to talk about things that are very prevalent and some things that we like to do from time to time. We usually once a year sort of have a look in on the various countries in Scandinavia, and we've had some sort of reports here and there from the UK, and with everything that's been coming out with the video from this bald and bankrupt chap, plus your recurring series basically on writing on the absolute state of Britain, if we can put it like that, combined with our experiences going to the events, we felt like, well, this is something we should probably talk a bit about and then try to understand. But before that, we have some of our patented red meat, so to speak. We'll have a bit of a report from the trenches here in Norway, where sort of the Manosphere talking points are, I'm not going to say having a resurgence, because they never really had a hold here as much as they do now. They're having like their first sort of appearance in mainstream media. And they're being led by a guy who time listener or watchers of Longhouse might recognize from our earlier politics streams. This guy here is the leader of the youth section, the youth party of the Progress Party, who famously we covered, I guess, let's see, half a year ago, something like that, when they had reported, before the elections, they reported a landslide victory for young men who who are below voting age, which doesn't really mean much, but in terms of like having a pulse on society, taking the pulse on society, it's an interesting vote, and young men seem to like all gravitate toward this guy because he's very good at speaking to them. He's very good at well, honestly, I see him as a really good politician. He's very good at playing the game. This guy can go far if he doesn't stumble, pretty much. And this week, he wrote an article. He did an interview with the second largest channel in Norway, talking about the impact of modern dating culture on sex and relationships and the plight, if you would call it that, of young men. Now, he does look very, some people are saying he looks like a questionable character. Absolutely. He looks a bit like he has that kind of used car salesman aura about him. But this is a bit of an unfortunate photo. When you see him on TV in motion, he dresses well. He, carries himself well. He's incredibly good at sort of leaving a political conversation coming across as sort of the normal and sensible person, which in the current political landscape usually means that everyone else looks retarded.
Yeah, and I think he understands how to do the influencer game, and that's where you have to be if you're going to be a modern politician coming up. You can't do it the old school way, trying to rely on institutions and trust. You have to be able to stand in front of the camera and do this whole kind of influencer 30-second talking points. And he's very good at it, and he seems to be able to do debates and be confronted with these kind of standard leftism browbeating strategies and just stand his ground, not concede, and not step into these kind of traps of saying too much or just revealing too much power level. So it's very, very promising.
Yeah.
Like I mentioned to you all, I enjoy the Scandinavian forehead physiognomy on this guy. I've been thinking a lot about this lately.
Very strong.
Very strong, yeah. I mean, you're seeing this. I think it's an overlooked thing, actually. I mean, I have the same forehead myself. I'm not saying this to trash him, but it's sort of very typical Scandinavian look. And I mean, I was looking at the posters for Dune 2 today. I was standing at a bus stop, right, and they're. I mean, I guess the Harkonnens were always supposed to be some kind of like Finnish, Russian, archetypes in the Dune universe, but now they're just
the Harkonnens is Skarsgård, isn't it?
Yeah, it's Skarsgård, right? Who's
yeah.
Swedish, right? And they cast this other kid who's supposed to be Fade, and he has like this massive Scandinavian forehead as well. So that's going to be like I'm watching Dune 2 this weekend. So it looks like it's like Brazil versus Scandinavia in the sense like the merry band of race mixed, Mediterraneans against the superior foreheads. So it'll be interesting to see how that pans out. Bit different aside, but yeah.
Similar physiognomy to Erling Haaland, actually. His hair and his...
That's true, yeah. But I mean, Ludwig said it, and I can say it for myself. Well, I'm not, as blonde or anything like this guy, but I too have a much more normal hair, but my forehead is still quite large compared to sort of other people. So I guess it's just the Nordic genetics. We just get, the big brains. They need that space. Anyway, the point of this article, his interview, and subsequent primetime debate show, which gave him a slot to basically go up against, alongside his fellows in the center right and some professors, etc., go up against the left, basically talking about whether or not the focus on women's rights have basically, let's use the word diminished or maybe suppressed any focus on men's rights, because this guy is sitting on like probably the largest political social media account in the country, is getting a lot of sort of what lefties call lived experience tales from young men who are struggling to basically succeed in society. And at this point, is his contention when it gets to this point, it basically becomes a political issue, even though it's like, sex isn't necessarily in normal mainstream, it's not considered a political issue. For people here, that might not sound very smart. A lot of us probably will collect sex or relationship culture with politics, but to normal mainstream, that's not something that's very that's not something that happens a lot. So he's sort of shining a light on this, and everyone is flailing around trying to explain it and blaming him for being a sexist or something. So it's very interesting to watch, and the left can't really do anything other than say that, well, it's about workers' rights, or blame him for being like, oh, you're watching. This is the thing, by the way. Some woman sort of like equated Jordan Peterson and Andrew Tate in the same sentence on the debate show, and that was kind of like I described it as a conversational flashbang. I had to pause and try to think about what sort of logic she's applying that leads Andrew Tate and Jordan Peterson, probably the most mild conservative to ever live, to be put in the same sentence. So it's not very interesting to talk about, really, other than reporting on it. I don't know if you have anything more you want to say, Ludwig Path.
Yeah, I mean, regarding to the Tate and Peterson thing, I mean, from this kind of like leftist, socialist kind of shitlib perspective, they're both talking to the same audience, right? The sort of lost boys of our generation, and they will bring up.
I feel like Jordan Peterson stopped talking to that audience like 10 years ago.
Yeah, but that's where they are, right? They are 10 years in the past with most of their political strategies. I mean, you can see why these. We know that we have our issues with the center right, and we shit on the center right, but you can sort of see why they're making headway, because the left is just garbage right now. I mean, you're seeing probably the same thing in other European countries, but if you can't do anything but like just blame workers' rights for everything, I almost had to pause it when I was watching the debate, and like the woman just started talking about like the reason that men aren't getting laid is because we lack workers' rights in Norway or something.
Yeah,
it's the like
it's because of the 9 to 5.
yeah, don't have enough days off or enough paid vacation. That's why they can't find women. I mean, it's what's that meme where you have like the crow that's in the stand-up pub, and he's looking at like his flashcard.
Better material.
Get better material. It's just workers' rights. Workers' rights. It's the only thing
better
that
schooling, workers' rights. Yeah.
And of course they go back to this kind of like gotcha thing where it's like you try to catch people in saying that, well, you want less rights for women, right? And he was very good at, and this is the key I think for most politicians, is that you can't ever say that you're going to diminish something. You cannot go out and tell people that you're going to have less. You have to say that it's not a pie. We're not going to have to make concessions. There's no constraint here. We're just going to give you everything you want with chips. And he was very good at it. It's just, well, yeah, okay, we have all these
thing is that he's saying that, right? He's saying that our focus on women's rights have impacted the focus on men's rights, right? That's what he's saying. And then all the feminists go, you can't just, you're saying that we should diminish women's rights. He says, no, I don't want to do that. I just want more focus on men's rights. But everyone listening to this with like two brain cells to rub together know what opportunity cost is and agree with them, right? Every moment we spend focusing on women's rights is a moment we're not spending focusing on men's rights. That's just, basic effort.
And of course, there are mutual gains that can be made for both parties, of course. But I mean, at some point, rights become a zero-sum game. Like if you have the right to have an abortion, for instance, then I mean, this was a thing in Norway where for a short period of time, doctors had the right to refuse to do an abortion. Right, you could reserve yourself against women who would ask you to do an abortion if you were a doctor, but that was removed later. But this is a case where it's like, well, it is a pie. Either the women get to have the right to have an abortion within a certain time frame, or the doctor gets the right to refuse that. But you can't really have both. So it is a pie, and that is kind of that's what you have to do as a politician, to actually weigh these things up against each other, while at the same time selling it to the public as they're going to have their cake and eat it. and he's very good at it. I think this is it's just a kind of sad reality if we're going to do a political debate, and not like a debate bro thing or YouTube debate, blood sports or anything. A political debate with as many viewers as you could imagine having for something like that. You have to tell people that they can have everything essentially, and if you're not doing that, you're losing a potential. You're going to lose a potential voter.
Yeah,
I mean, I just a throwback to Ronald Reagan. I think he was very good at doing that and sort of presenting his vision for politics as everybody's going to win with this stuff, as opposed to someone like Jimmy Carter, who had the much more kind of like sober. I think Jimmy Carter was basically hated for being that guy who told people that you're going to have less, even though he actually had good reasons for it. Nobody wants to hear that, especially not from politicians. But yeah, that's just my rant on that. I think I've veered way off already. So
yeah. On the screen here for like 5 minutes, we've had a super chat from Peregrinus de Flandria for €2. Thank you so much. Saying, return to King Knut. It is time. Nordana says, this is an ice cold take. Let's see how the Norwegian normies react. Yeah. Well, that's the funny part about it for anyone who's been paying attention. Manosphere talking points are a bit passé at this point. We're kind of beyond the gender war stuff. Okay. Head on over to the main event for today. So we're going to talk about Britain, the UK in general, and the reason we brought Nomad on is because he recently wrote a couple of articles on the economy of the UK, the state of it, the sort of how did we get here, and what are the problems that the UK is facing in the future. He's also written some, at least one, if not more articles, you might have to correct me on this, about how it has been for you to return to places like London after living outside of Britain for quite a while. And you seem to be just as shocked as me and Ludwig were both times when we went to the UK event, I think 2 years ago, and of course last year. I had, for the longest time, sort of an image of Britain in my head from when I was younger, going on vacation there once, where sort of Brits, I'm going to say, it was always, you go to London, you go to other places in Britain, you get the sense that, the buildings there are very old. There's a lot of history.
Yeah.
But going there now, there's an additional layer of just sort of derelict, of just, things not being taken care of. It's dirty. It's run down, I guess is the word that comes to mind.
Totally, yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And I suppose that's the image you're getting as well.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. It was around about last autumn, around about August or September, where I kind of made that pivot away from the sort of political economy and the US empire and tried to focus more on the UK. And, I started a series of articles, like you said, on the economy, also mass immigration. And it wasn't until I actually, kind of started to unpack these topics that I realized what a colossal mess the UK is in. I mean, any way you look at it, the UK is a mess. I mean, I'm sorry. I know that sounds a bit of an oversimplification, but economically, socially, politically, culturally, and I think since coming back, it struck me how this is actually reflected visibly up and down the country, as you kind of documented with your trip.
Yeah, what was interesting was this week on Twitter, a lot of people reposted clips from a YouTube channel called Bald and Bankrupt. He does kind of this what's it called, like danger tourism or something.
That's what he does. Yeah,
kind of like Callum from the Lotus Eaters.
He's really interesting. Yeah, he's very good. He so it's a bit of an aside, but he actually went to it kind of fell down for him when he went to Kazakhstan, but Kazakhstan is where Russia keeps its space program. Maybe maybe people in the chat. It's actually still. It was there in the former Soviet Union, but they didn't move it. It's still there. And he actually went to this hangar where the original, the first Russian space probe was. It's called the Buran. It's a really good video. It's not, unfortunately, it's not related to this, but it's about 40 minutes. He actually got arrested by the authorities, but they released him after like a few hours of interrogation. And then basically Baldwin Bankrupt just turned his focus to less dangerous terrain, namely the UK, although that's...
well, he did recently go to Afghanistan too, I think.
I think he's been all over the place. He's one of these people who he doesn't recognize borders, but or danger that much. But yeah, that's a bit of an aside. But if you want to check out his channel, Baldwin Bankrupt, for anyone in the chat. But
it is quite almost cozy, the way he does the thing that only Brits can do, which is just show up somewhere and sort of have that, like, heart on his sleeve, I'll figure something out, bumble my way through some dangerous situations type of... What's the stiff upper lip? Is that the
stiff upper
saying, right?
Stiff upper lip. And I think also when you watch his videos, you get a strong feeling that they're not like fake, they're not astroturf, they are actually pretty, they are real, and what he's doing is real. But yeah, basically, I mean, the grime, the filth, the decay, just the destitution. I mean, it just seems everywhere to me now. It's just part and parcel of the UK. And I mean, I don't know what to say. I don't want to be too negative, but
what I find interesting is that, someone like Baldwin Bankrupt will make a video where he goes to what he's identified as the worst places in the UK. He goes to... I should have looked this up, but he goes to like 3 specific places in his latest video. And all of them look pretty much like whatever we saw whenever we visited Britain for the event. Unless you're standing in some kind of city center, right, where
Sure,
maybe they're cleaning a bit better. But you walk like 5 minutes out of the center and it looks just like what he showed in that video, and those are deemed by him at least as the worst places. And I'm thinking, well, I've seen that in just quote unquote regular places in the UK.
Exactly.
So
it's this collection, this symphony of decline. That's what I called it in one of my reflection series. So it's derelict and abandoned buildings, it's graffiti, it's litter, it's boarded up shops, abandoned cars and vehicles. And also another point is the people, to be honest with you. There's just a lot of people who, for want of a better description, either they're, under the influence or they just do not look well to do. And this is just sort of repeated kind of everywhere. I did 2 trips recently to Swindon, to the Lotus Eaters, and to actually this week I went to Sutton, and again it's the same recurring themes. It's all part of this slow and steady decay, and again it's reflected elsewhere in the economy, industry, and so on and so forth. And as Peregrinus has just sort of given us a very generous super chat. I mean, the City of London is a part of it, actually, and maybe we'll get to that a bit.
He says the City of London and its consequences for the UK for £2.
Well,
sorry, €2.
I mean, to be honest, Walrus Luddick, I mean, this is quite complex. When you deal with the decline of Britain, there's a lot of things that go into it. There's a lot of push and pull factors, but really, since the era of Thatcher, the UK has favoured the City of London and finance ahead of industry. Almost, we're actually, we're coming up to half a century for that, really. And
there was one thing
consequences
that's sort of stuck out to me when I remember reading your article.
Sure.
You commented on a skills gap in the UK, which is hurting it a lot. And it's very interesting that the UK has, if I remember you correctly, you concluded that the UK has a shortage on sort of high level technology training, but also low level. I'm saying low level in terms of like education, of course, formal education, but also vocational training. So, I mean, what we're essentially looking at is a lot of people who are educated to do other things than what the nation needs. Is that really what's going on here?
The UK has a lot of problems with the economy. We really do. I mean, our economy is marked by low growth, high debt, low productivity, as you just spoke of, ongoing high inflation, cost of living crisis, a lack of investment. There are all kinds of problems because, I mean, all of these things kind of are self-reinforcing, right? And the skills gap is basically a product of a lack of investment in human resources, in training and upskilling. And yeah, our skills shortage, I mean, I found that it's going to cost us £120 billion by the year 2030. There's many areas where we have this skills gap. Technology is one of them. We're not the only country in that regard, but its employment is still below pre-pandemic levels. I think there's approximately 300,000 vacancies up and down the country. It's difficult. There's many factors at work: early retirement, long-term sickness, an antiquated education system that doesn't emphasize, tech skills and IT. But I think the biggest problem is just the lack of investment in human resources, and that's another problem. Of course, low investment is another issue. British companies don't invest in technological upgrades, capital equipment, again, human resources. It's all part of it's a kind of a vicious cycle, really. But and also UK, because we suffer from low productivity, it's difficult because that is reflected in the bottom line of a lot of companies, and then that affects wages, and it's again a self-reinforcing cycle. So skills gap is definitely one of those underlying issues, definitely.
Where do you think the skills gap comes from? Like, this sounds like a stupid question,
answer,
but
Blair.
Yeah, I mean, but it's just, I mean, looking at the UK, they are in a very, very peculiar situation, and it's sort of it's a bit of a web to look at, honestly. Especially compared to many other European countries, it's sort of hard to understand in many ways. Like, I'm looking at it, and there's, the things that you're mentioning is that there's, like you said, a lack of investment, there's lack of skills, and like, there's no reason when I look at the UK and the people who live there, it's like, why would they not invest, or why would they lack skills? I perceive them as a particularly, intelligent and creative bunch of people. They have a good sort of location for trade, respect internationally and so on. So it's kind of a little bit difficult for me to understand exactly where this stuff breaks, and not just like blaming it on Thatcher or Blair or something, but like, okay, maybe that is the correct thing to do, but it's just hard for me to really understand.
No, it's a good point. There's a lot of back and forth debate on this issue. I mean, for a start, it's estimated that something like 20% of the workforce is going to be significantly just underskilled by 2030, and I think it's something like 2/3 of large UK businesses said they struggle to recruit employees with the skills they need. Now, I think there's a lot of factors at play here. It's often said that a lot of UK companies don't really pay very well for many of these new skills, such as programming, automation, and whatnot. At the same time, we're not investing in our workforce in order to upskill them so that they can do these jobs. There's a lot of factors at work. My last full temporary position in the UK, I mean, they were talking about automation with Python coding and things like that. and they were not paying well. They were paying like in the low 20s. And I said to them, look, you're not going to get these skills. You're not going to get this dynamic added to your business, with this approach. It's just not it's not going to happen. I think people get paid better elsewhere, and they head off to other countries now. If you've got these in-demand tech skills, which are in demand all across the world, you're going to go where you're compensated best. And I think it also, but I think a part of it, to be honest, Ludwig, is like the cost of living in the UK, especially in London, the property crisis, the amount it costs to rent now is just really, really high. And I think all these factors play in. To be honest, it's not like there's one reason. There's many, forces at work. But I keep hearing London just isn't it. It's got the veneer of being global and competitive and whatnot, and there is a high concentration of human capital in the southeast. Some people say more than a lot of regions, a lot of comparable regions on Earth. But I think when you dig deeper, the problems, become clear and become abundant. So, yeah, it's
with the real estate prices, I think maybe the problem there is maybe too much investment. Because as I understand it, a very significant part of London real estate is owned by foreign investors, say like Indians, Arabs, and so on.
Yeah,
because they have very liberal policies in terms of ownership. So there's a lot of criminal money and things that are just being moved there to hold because of the lax regulations, which of course then pushes up property prices and makes it difficult. So there's a kind of problem of, or a conflict of interest there between like, okay, you need to be actually able to have competitive prices so that people can live and work there. But because you have all this kind of real estate investment, then nobody can afford it, and they'd rather just go live elsewhere where their money is actually worth something.
Well, the problem is also that it sort of pushes, when you get out to the suburbs. I mean, Scrum Benevolent did a good video on this, and I've been sort of paying attention to the state of new builds, as they're called in the UK, like these modern houses that they build.
They're awful.
They make them extremely cheap because the property is so expensive in the suburbs, and the quality of these houses is just awful.
Extremely small. Yeah.
The Dino boxes or whatever they're called now. Yeah.
Property is to be honest, guys, we could probably do a whole sort of stream on just this.
Yeah, let's not get bogged down. We have a couple of super chats here real quick, or did you want to say something before that?
No, I just I was going to go on a monologue. Let's do the super chats and see where we go. Yeah.
We can do you can have your monologue after. Let's see.
Okay.
Margarinus de Flandria for £10 says, I think this is London Calling from what are they called? I hate his voice. The Clash, is that it? Yeah.
The Clash, yeah.
The ice age is coming, the sun's zooming in, engines stop running, the wheat's growing thin. A nuclear error, but I have no fear, because London is drowning and I live by the river.
Yeah, that's very... I should steal that, really. that's very good.
Carl Habermas for £20 says, if it isn't left-wing policies, if it isn't solely IQ, if it isn't psychology and it isn't immigrants, then is it just the reality of the end of a culture soul, the reality of mass and scale? Are there just too many of us? Well, it's something we touched on a little bit in our last stream, actually. We said at some point that, some of these things almost seem like just a feature of civilization when it gets too big. It's kind of like the organism that is civilization just sort of gets a cancer. And is unable to heal itself, but it depends whether or not UK is at, are we talking, stage 4 cancer? Are we talking a benign tumor that could be removed, right?
I
that's the discussion.
Very generous super chat from Carl. Yeah, another great writer at Praxarchy. I think he's totally right, actually. I have an article which I'll send along to you, Ludwig, soon. Just about cities generally. because I think, past a certain line in the sand, it doesn't matter how much planning you do or how much investment or how good your infrastructure is. I think Carl's right. Past a certain point, there's just too many people to absorb and to live life in comfort. Do you know what I mean? I mean, it's just the more people you have, the greater the strain on the infrastructure, the transit system, housing, utilities. And in my opinion, I think you see this throughout the world, really. I don't think there's only one way of doing this properly. It's just a byproduct of sort of globalization, really, and this sort of very integrated system of goods, capital, people, the movement, the free movement of peoples, reduced air travel. It's all part of the same. They're all symptoms of the same, and symptoms and causes of the same problem. And I think that's very.
So let's talk a bit about that for a moment, because the UK obviously had Brexit, which I'm not up to date on how much Brexit it really was. Because it seems like the Brexit that you did get as sort of like a cherry on top of everything else here is also hurting the UK economy.
Yeah, that's right. Brexit is it is one of the big causal factors. The biggest one behind my two articles, Walrus, was probably the 2008 global crisis and our response to that, particularly the bailouts of the banks, the bailout of the banks and whatnot. But Brexit, unfortunately, although you're speaking to somebody who voted to leave, I'm not going to lie about that. It has negatively impacted the UK economy in several ways. The goods we import from the EU are now taxed. The pound was devalued by about 13% against the euro, which made our imports more expensive, but we didn't necessarily see an increase in exports, in large part down to the fact that we don't really export anything of value apart from financial services. And actually exports have declined because we've got higher import costs for components and raw materials. So again, it's all part of this sort of self-reinforcing cycle. We've also got a lot of bureaucracy related to customs declarations and whatnot, and also investment has really tailed off since Brexit. By some estimates, we've lost about £30 billion of investment in the country since 2016 because investors have gone elsewhere. But Brexit is definitely a big part. It would have been good if we could have stayed in the customs union, but it's caused so much.
I mean, no one. I think trying to remember back, the pre-Brexit discussions and debates. I mean, no one really denied that doing Brexit would lead to a short-term economic hit. It's just kind of like this is, as I said, the cherry on top of everything else. I suppose.
I remember back to that period actually, and of course I also support. I mean, I don't live in the UK, but I was very supportive of the Brexiters, the people who wanted to leave the EU, because I was very much sort of EU skeptic, Euro skeptic. I mean, that was sort of the trend at the time. If you were on the right wing, the PE influencers I followed touted this as this was going to be the great thing that's going to set off an avalanche, right, of other people also leaving the EU. I think it might be interesting to do like an entire retrospect episode on Brexit itself, because I didn't understand what a big deal it was at the time. I mean, looking at some history, I think EU is like now the UK is like the most senior member of the EU, that they would have started like a sort of French Anglo Union. So they are the oldest EU member that decided, and probably the only big country that's actually decided to leave the EU, because it seems like everybody else is joining up now, and especially like with the Ukraine Russia stuff, the EU has been very strengthened. And I'm sort of thinking to myself, like looking back at it, especially with the UK, the type of country it is, because it's not a massive land power. It's very much a sort of trade based country that is, dependent on shipping and importing and exporting, immigration in and out, and so on. Like, what was the logic kind of behind the Brexit? What were people actually expecting to get out of it? Like, I get that there's this kind of nationalistic intent there, but there seems to be kind of a missing reality check in terms of, okay, this is the kind of country that we are. In a sense, it's very difficult to run this type of country effectively if you're going to leave these unions. And if you're leaving these trade unions, what's the alternative? And that's always the question. What is going to be the next thing if this is what we're going to do? And what's the plan here? And I mean, it would be really nice to just go back and revisit and just look at some of the arguments, especially for the people on the right, what they were, I come back to this now as well, like what people are actually expecting to get out of these proposed solutions. But like Brexit has been one of the bigger head scratchers, because it puts the UK in like this very strange position now, where like Euroscepticism seems to be very diminished because of the geopolitical situation, both with the kind of more kind of NATO skeptic attitudes in the US and Russian aggression. So I mean, I'm just kind of, it's a very kind of weird dynamic with the UK, along with everything else that's being mentioned.
It is. I mean, Brexit, I mean, again, we could do a whole stream on this, but I think it just became so complicated so quickly. I mean, I think we ignored the extent to which we just have this totally globally integrated economic system, and we thought that we could stand on our own, we could hold our own, and we would be immune to any of the shocks or any of the problems that go with that. But the reality was totally different. It was a big red pilling sort of moment for me personally, because I was all for Brexit. At the same time, I was also rooting for Trump in America. I was just a normie con. And that was one of the things that shook me out of my stupor and said, look, you need new perspectives on this, because none of this is working. None of this is going according to plan. And, I think we just sort of, a lot of people were taken in by, the propaganda, the rhetoric, the idea that we'd get control of our borders back. But unfortunately, a lot of that sovereignty has devolved. A lot of it lies with the European Court of Human Rights, and they get to dictate a lot of what goes on. Of course, it kind of backfired because, okay, EU migration went down, but non-EU immigration increased exponentially, right? And the non-EU immigrants, they tend to be lower skilled than their EU counterparts. They also tend to bring over more dependence as well. And we talked about, well, we almost started this off with the skills gap, right? Well, part of the reason we have that skills gap is because fewer people from the EU who were skilled are now coming to the UK. Now, I'm all for training up the, domestic UK workforce to meet those skills shortages, but it's got to be done properly. It's got to be done right. And now, of course, we have Infinity Africans, pretty much the same with, other groups as well that come over. And the whole thing has been a colossal mess. It's created a lot of instability in the UK. I mean, David Cameron resigned as a result of the decision, as he pledged he would. Theresa May, who took over from Cameron, she resigned in part because of the Brexit fiasco. In the meantime, the pound was devalued, as we mentioned. Investment went down, and it's just created a lot of problems. I think we ignored the extent to which we're dependent on the EU. Of course, we know that the EU is the UK's biggest trading bloc, if you like, and it's left us kind of in a permanent crisis, if you like, a sort of political crisis, a crisis of legitimacy. Where do we stand now? And it definitely is a big part of the problem. But you can see already, guys, can't you? Investment, Brexit, property, also, as Ludwig mentioned, geopolitical events like the Russia-Ukraine war, leading to increased the price of commodities. All of these are part of the same, the same recipe. And it's that's why I said at the beginning it's a mess, because that's
It really
exactly
is.
what
Yeah.
it is, really.
I'm seeing some of the comments that are kind of articulating maybe a little bit stronger, like the actual vision for what the UK Brexit was going to be like. I mean, you talk about we're gonna get sovereignty back, right? I guess that's the idea. I've been thinking a lot about this. I'm going off on a bit on a tangent here, maybe as a continuation of my a bit of my rant that I had last stream. That I think I angered a lot of people. But there's we have the let's say the global DR sphere, where I think like the US and the UK are the biggest players. So you have the most influencers and the most people. And there's been an attempt to try to facilitate cooperation, between the Americans and the Europeans. But the problem has sort of remained that the goals of the dissidents in the US and the sort of Europe in general, I find to be completely contradictory. And it's sort of weird that I've not seen this previously, because as you talked about, you're on the right and you follow these influencers in 2016, and with you go from the Gamergate and then say, oh yeah, Brexit, and then you root for Trump. But I've just later come to realize that most of the American dissident right, what they want, I think what's the sort of the goal that they have is that they want to grill in peace. Basically, they want to grill in peace and go to church. And how do they get that? Well, they want to institute a kind of isolationist policy and take the US influence out of the world and remove their military bases, remove foreign involvement, just focus inwardly and have more of like a cohesive American policy with less immigration, more culturally conservative, and a sort of government that will actually respect more of these conservative traditions that they have. And
sure,
it doesn't seem like it's completely unrealistic with the US being capable of self-sufficiency. It has sort of enough people, it has enough natural resources, it's big enough, isolated enough sort of geographically for that to actually function. The question is, how does this jive with the European ideas, where like some of these European countries want a degree of sovereignty for themselves, but they're completely dependent on US military support and a lot of other US infrastructure.
Yeah, absolutely.
And basically, I sort of understand now why so many of these European politicians have just been like treating Trump like a vampire in a sense, because I can sympathize with the kind of red American I want to be left alone dream, but there's nothing to be gained there from a European perspective, and vice versa. Like, they have no interest in trying to help European countries maintain any kind of sovereignty the other way. And like, and I know I ruffled a lot of feathers, and I'll just give a slight apology, because I wasn't intending that. But when I'm talking about conscriptions and military, like, there's a total sort of military deficit, I think, in European countries in general. And if you actually want, and you look at the concept of wanting some kind of right-wing sovereignty, there needs to be a massive uptick in actual standing armies in European countries. Like, the way that it is now, it's just not going to work when you have like these tiny armies, or some of these countries that have just completely abandoned having any kind of military recruitment at all. And then they're going to stand, and we're going to stand on our own feet and just create our own industries and maintain overnight sovereignty and over. Yeah, but I mean, somebody has to pick up rifles, right? You can't just have a bunch of like white collar workers and environmental policies and this kind of nonsense. That actually needs to be a remilitarization effort, and that's sort of some of these things that I had in mind when I was talking about military conscriptions. Like, especially from a European perspective, I didn't want the idea that you're going to go in the military and you're going to fight in Yemen alongside the Americans or something. It's really more, what comes next for Europe, in a sense? If we can just sort of concede the idea that the European and the US dream, in a sense, like, these right-wing dreams are completely incompatible, and they just have nothing to do with each other, then we have to sort of think about things a little bit differently.
I totally agree, Ludwig. I mean, I think we need a complete sort of rethink on really on our situation and our position. I mean, for example, in the UK, I mean, we are a mid-level power. We're probably not even a mid-level power now. You know, we're all a part of all these multilateral organizations, whether it's the World Bank, the IMF, the World Health Organization, the WHO, the World Trade Organization, the UN, NATO. I mean, honestly, guys, pick out 3 letters from a hat and you'll find an acronym for a multilateral global organization. That's just the way the world is. And the idea that the UK is going to kind of stand on its own, stiff upper lip, the blitz spirit. I mean, we're in a different age now. I mean, one of the things that became apparent during COVID is, you know, we don't really have any real sustainable industries, you know, financial services, hedge fund management, whatever. I mean, all these sort of tertiary industries.
Spreadsheets aren't going to fill themselves.
Exactly. You know, this is, you know, when there's a global pandemic, I mean, well, where's the grain going to come from? Where's all the commodities? You know, this just doesn't add up. You know, we've got this tertiary level economy, which we'll probably get into a bit more later. And, you know, when there is a global downturn, we're totally and utterly exposed. I mean, the UK now, and even my normie friends, even like my family, agree with me. Everything we consume is produced and manufactured from somewhere else. Like almost everything, the contents of our living room, of our fridge, and the idea that we can go to, you know, like AA's vision of Trumptonshire. I mean, it's just not going to happen without real, substantial, formative change that is probably realistically going to take decades and a complete rethink of how we see things. So everybody sits around saying, oh, yeah, let's, you know, a few months ago, oh, is it going to be DeSantis? Is it going to be Trump? Is it going to be Starmer in the UK or Rishi Sunak? And I just pull away from all of that. I just got no time for that because it's not going to make one iota of difference. It just isn't. I mean, people just don't see the problem. All of this exists and takes place under this vast global sort of superstructure of, you know, devolved power. I mean, you look during COVID, I mean, we followed the World Health Organization's sort of MO, their modus operandi, and that is basically de facto controlled by Bill Gates because he's the biggest donor to them, right? So, okay, we can debate that a bit, but you know, that's a good. That's
I'm sure the foundation has been, you know, part of writing all the documents that lay out the rules and regulations, right?
And this has been the post-World War II order, really, since the end of World War II. I mean, I don't mean to go off track a bit, but, you know, in 1944, you had Bretton Woods, and that was a monetary agreement. 1945, you had the UN Charter, that was a political union. And then in 1949, you've got NATO, which is a military union. So within 5 years after the end of World War II, much of the global system that we now know was, you know, designed and rolled out. And it's the United States that has a veto power, has the controlling power in many of these organizations. And I'm going off on a tangent, but the idea, you know, looking back on the Brexit stuff, it's so cringe. I mean, including myself, where I was, you know, ideologically, politically. But, you know, I think people see the weeds a bit more clearly now, I think. But yeah, I don't know, Ludwig, the sentiment of what you echoed, I totally,
What's
it resonates
interesting,
with me anyway.
What I find interesting talking about all of this with the economy, with the uncertainty going forward, and with this backdrop of sort of a general decline, we can debate how true that is on a, you know, nation by nation basis. But viewers of the Longhouse might remember a stream we did almost a year ago now, talking about a book called Surviving the Future by David Fleming, who is this sort of strange eco-economist book on how a scaled down post decline future might look like, and how that would actually be more beneficial as an alternative to a Trumpton, as you said, Nomad.
Yeah.
It's not that you can't create Trumpton in the current version, but you can create something like it in the next iteration, basically.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's
And of course, his vision, David Fleming, I think is his name, is very sort of anti-globalist.
yeah.
But through this like the green lens, right? Not because he's like super right wing or anything. It's the other way around.
In these sorts of authors, I'd encourage people to explore some of these writers, researchers a bit more, because I think they make a lot of good points about the way capital operates, and the sort, the broader system that all of this operates under. Now, I'm not saying they have all the solutions, but I think the problem is I just don't see a way of reconciling industrialized life. I've seen this in Japan. I've seen this in South Korea. I've seen this in many places with my own eyes, to be honest with you. I just feel very conflicted. Like you'll go to like some poor village in like Myanmar, Burma, right? Which is, barely second world. According to all the indices, it's not very prosperous or developed, but they're all in their element. They're not surrounded by neoliberal capitalism or consumerism. They have much more realistic standards for life. And, I'm not saying it's utopian, but I think there's a lot of problems built into this system. Do you know what I mean? And I think these are points that we need to explore. I think some people in the DR have sort of gotten to grips with this. Morgoth talks a lot about this and whatnot. AA, as well. But I think at its core, there's something about it that there are problems you just can't reconcile, and I think that's a big part of the broader issue. I think we're going off topic a bit, but
no, it's good stuff. I forgot to thank Carl Habermas here for the £20 donation. That is very generous. Hopefully, we answered at least some of your questions here. Is there anything else you want to say on this topic? If not, there's a couple of other super chats.
No, I think let's go to the.
I think we veered off a bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
My fault.
No, it's all good. Peregrinus de Flandria for another €5 says Sargon / the British right should become the Merlin to a new Arthur. Well, Peregrinus, if you buy the event book for last year's Witten when it comes out, you can read my speech there, and I think you'll find that I agree with you. Maven Politics says forehead size is strongly related to a culture of milk drinking. Not sure if that's intended as an insult or he's commenting on the strength of my bones.
I think he came in a little bit later.
He's referring to the intro. Dana O'Shea says you need a £500 license to use Weed Killer in the UK, I assume, which needs a renewal every 3 to 5 years, which sounds insane. Now, to be fair, in Norway, we do have restrictions on what kind of weed killer you can use. Something about sort of serving the soil over longer periods of time. But if I need weed killer, I just go to a hardware store and buy weed killer. Let's see here. Carl Habermas for another £5. I'm saying, are we sure the cause of all our problems isn't white women dancing to popular music?
Oh, that was
maybe we. I refuse to engage with that stuff, but maybe we'll just make them stop dancing to spring break music, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, some interesting Twitter interactions around that thing. I don't know if I really don't feel like veering off into that territory, but things are getting very spurgy in our spheres. Yeah.
Walrus, are you going to play any of the videos by any chance?
Oh yeah, I did play some of them as you were talking earlier, but we can have a look at Which one did you want to start with, the Bald and Bankrupt, or?
Yeah, let's do Bald and Bankrupt. Yeah, and then maybe.
So I figured a workaround would be to temporarily just not have audio when playing this, just in case he decides to not play ball with us and reject or do any like copy strikes, or if he has any sort of backing, that stuff goes automatically. I just need to sit through an ad, and then we'll be good. In the meantime, we can talk about the last super chat from Peregrinus de Flandria for €2 once more. Talking about Europeans rearming themselves is actually good. Well, yes, I would agree on a national / civilizational level. I would. Let's see here. It's still playing an ad. I do have an ad block, but I opened this link in like incognito mode, which disables my extensions. Here we go. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen, and here it is. Oh, and it just started playing another ad. That's great.
You got a 5-second one, is it?
Yeah, it's a 5-second ad. Or is it? It's 2 ads? Wow.
Oh no, should skip.
I'm really not used to how much ads there are on. Any Milwaukee boys in the chat? I've gone public as a DeWalt man. Okay, here we go. We've got Bald and Bankrupt. Walking around. He is. Does it say it in? He is
Plymouth.
not saying. Is it Plymouth? He is in.
Yeah, he's in Plymouth.
And something about just sort of the level of, I guess, grime is the word.
Yeah, I mentioned that. Oh, this
and
is
we have
actually...
some local.
Yeah, just
youths.
a sort of comment from an outsider, because I don't live in the UK, but I've been to the UK. But I mean, there are certain things about the UK, like the weather, for instance, that it seems to always be grayish. It's like
Well, that's fine. Yeah.
when I'm in Amsterdam, you know, that's the way it is. And there's also population density, right? Because it's a small island, at least relatively. So that's there. And like these buildings are built very closely to each other. But the thing that is sort of particular now is the kind of the lack of maintenance, I guess. Or
Exactly.
the sort of the lack of ownership to taking care of it. Because when you have, like you said, very densely populated areas, they get used a lot, right? There's a lot of people passing through.
Sure.
Litter, you know, whether it's dirt that's being tossed around, there's wear and tear, and it requires a very kind of active people taking a very active role in sort of ownership of it to keep it in nice shape. And we've seen that in the past, but now it's kind of slipped up. And I guess multiculturalism is sort of the easy thing to point at here, because it's not only like people from other cultures, but having that confusion, it's very observable that it creates a sort of lack of ownership to things, and people feel like it's always externalized. It's always somebody else's responsibility to clean up the streets or clean the litter, and there's no real incentive for them to even do this. Something that we've talked about many times. Some of it might be, I don't know. I mean, I've been thinking a lot in terms of like demographics, not in terms of multiculturalism, but age. Do you think that plays a factor? I mean, are Brits very old?
We are a rapidly aging society, but I think with all these derelict properties, all this destitution, I think it's a bit more immediate, sort of elemental, in the sense that the government's broke, to be honest with you, and we've been borrowing our way out of problems for so long, but now interest rates are high, so borrowing has become more expensive on the one hand. On the other hand, servicing our existing
like
debt.
an ad every 30 seconds on this video. Jesus.
I've never seen this before. And on the other hand, servicing our existing debt is becoming more expensive too. So the government's got no money for everything. They have to, reduce
Okay.
rubbish collections.
Yes. So like the lefties have a point then. It's like you need more money for them programs to actually make this stuff work. And like I don't just want to laugh at that because
Well, I
like
mean,
government services
money
matter.
for programs is government. It's just about directing the money into something productive and not like
yes.
programs that,
Yeah.
I don't know what they go to now, but it's certainly not keeping these buildings in order, right?
I
So
mean,
there's austerity then, I guess, is the issue here, or
exactly. Yeah. And on the other hand, private investors, the private sector, you look at these places, they don't want to invest in these areas, do they? Because their business is not going to excel. There's no potential for economic growth or development, so they don't want to do it either. And what happens is things just progressively get worse and worse. I mean, you look at the top 4 items in the UK budget, it's the NHS, debt service repayments, welfare, and then social housing. And that says all you need to know where we are economically and kind of socially as well. For most people, those 4 things, social housing, welfare, the NHS, debt interest, they don't apply to you for most of the productive sort of middle class, because the NHS is basically functionally broken. You can't get in. So this is the problem. Again, this is even in some ways even better. This is a wandering turnip. I should sort of point out, when I was doing the articles, it was kind of quite interesting because something interesting occurred. I kind of stumbled on this new YouTube niche, this genre of people like Bald and Bankrupt, Wandering Turnip. There's another guy called Wendell. They basically just go across the country and, they just document what's happening in real time, the decline and whatnot. Not just adventure tourism like Bald and Bankrupt, but there's so many of these YouTubers out there, and their videos are kind of invaluable, when talking about this stuff, because this is what you'll see if you go to Plymouth, if Walrus, if Luddick, if Carl, whoever, if we go there, this is what you're going to see. This is Newcastle. This is in the north. And look at, at
least this is a back alley sort of deal.
Yeah.
I mean, when we looked at Bald and Bankrupt, it's just sort of all over the place. It's on the high streets, right?
Yeah. It's everywhere now. Now, of course, the other thing is post-COVID, especially the what's a Carl? Carl, are you paying? The UK high street has been decimated. Well, the economy generally has, because when you factor in global geopolitical events, rising costs of energy and whatnot, it just, the UK high street is really struggling. And near me, you won't see it that bad, but it's still, it's on that slippery slope. And the problem is decline is just that, a slippery slope, isn't it? And, if it's not worth investing there, if there's no productive class of people, there's minimal chances for economic growth, expansion. Private sector doesn't want to invest. They don't want to take business there because there's no return on their investment. Buildings go derelict, they become abandoned. The government takes them over, and it's just part of a self-perpetuating cycle. That last one you showed,
downward spiral, I guess, is the term.
Downward spiral. That's
you could
exactly
use.
what it is.
Walrus, could you highlight one of Carl Habermas's comments here? He's talking about learning a second language. I thought it was pretty funny. Let's see here.
He says, you must understand the lengths the Anglo will go to in order to avoid learning a second language for another generation. The true meaning of, quote, at least we aren't speaking German.
But this is something that I've been thinking of, because you look at these different countries in Europe, and now we're talking about the UK and like the UK dissidents, and as you've lined out here, Nomad, and this is the sentiment that I see from the UK base in general. Like it's a bleak situation, like particularly bleak, very much a downward spiral. You sort of established, things aren't getting better. Demographics aren't getting better. The economy isn't getting better. The kind of geopolitical situation isn't going to improve. So, like you see with a lot of these people, they aren't really, they'll have sentiments like I don't have a country anymore or something. So I'm wondering how many of them are considering emigrating, and like what's the natural kind of next best spot for like British dissidents to go? Have you thought about this?
Yeah, it's really hard. I mean, just life here is just so expensive. We're taxed on what we earn. We're taxed on what we spend. There's a cost of living crisis. Housing is through the roof. We don't know when things are going to get better. The Bank of England hasn't reached a general consensus of when rates are going to cap out and when they're going to start lowering interest rates. It could be middle of the year. There's always a 3-month lag anyway. I mean, a little bit. I think a lot of people know some of my background and the fact that I've lived abroad and things. Our good friend Liquid Swan, he's done a lot of good work on this area, and he's been quite brave and bold in his assertions. Really, of course, Swan is in Canada. It's a bit different, but I don't know. I think about this a lot. There's no easy, quick fire solution. It will differ on a case by case basis. I mean, I've lived in Korea, in Japan, but would I want to live there permanently? It's okay for an experience, but it's a lot harder when you start thinking about, building a future there, raising a family. It's there's no easy solutions. I mean, I think especially if you're not on the housing ladder, if you're not on the property ladder, then it becomes a lot more of an enticing prospect to go abroad. But I don't believe in running away from the issues either. But it's hard because I think ultimately, Walrus, when we were in the chat, you said you read Reflections 4, which I did as a result of these articles. When I did the 2 articles on the UK economy, I must have watched like a dozen videos on YouTube about the UK's economic prospects and how it got into this position. And I was just totally just mentally kind of worn out. And then I did Reflections 4 as a response to all that. And I mentioned that basically the result of all this, I should be 3, sorry. That's a different one.
Yeah. Yeah, I figured it was 3 actually. When I looked it up, I was like, wait, this is the Ali G one.
The point is we're just looking at a lower standard of living, poorer public services, higher costs, and fewer prospects. That's the result, because I don't think any government, either the sitting Tory government or Labour, really have a solution. I mean, I kind of comically said, the UK is a country where everything's broken, nothing works, and no one knows what's going on. And, increasingly, I don't think anyone I think fewer and fewer people actually have stopped caring, to be honest with you.
My question is, again, I mean, when people get to the point, I've seen, they say someone like, Peter Hitchens echo that sentiment that it's just over, right? But if you are at that point, for me, the logical next point, okay, where do I go now, right? We had Chris Gard on like 2 streams ago. I mean, Australia sounds surprisingly nice, actually, from his from talking with him. I mean, if people considered that, because you'd be with people who have, probably a similar outlook, might have like similar genetic ancestry. Nathan Hood mentioned maybe like the Scandi countries could be brought in. I mean, I'm not sure like the process of going through immigration and so on, how difficult it is, but I'm just thinking, if you are at that point where it's just ogre and like there's nothing to stand there and defend, then maybe it's just time to get up and leave.
Yeah, I think Australia and New Zealand do offer a lot of good prospects. I think the climate is a lot different, especially on, I think is it the east as well. But they're quite isolated, and you've got to remember a lot of New Zealanders and Aussies, they also emigrate a lot as well. Personally, I have a bit more of a bias to the Asian continent. That might not be everybody's cup of tea, but Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore are all very very pleasant, very comfortable. There's different sort of criteria if you want to get a residency visa and whatnot. It all depends on your skills and, also, let's be honest, your income, your assets and things, that's going to determine, your prospects of going abroad. I mean, it's a bit hard because a lot of Europe is struggling with these issues. I mean, there's this modern phenomenon. I don't know if you guys have heard of it, called the digital nomad kind of thing, of people who just work
people
from
who
their
leave to
laptop.
just sit on a boat somewhere and
Yeah, I mean,
siphon
I
money. Yeah.
tried that a bit, but again, do you want to be? It's a bit funny with my name. Do you want to be a nomad forever? Do you want to be rootless? Do you want to be estranged from your country? It's difficult, and I think a lot of people around the world are sort of going through these same problems and these same ideas and potential solutions. I don't think it's
The point is, if,
isolated just the UK.
and
But yeah,
this is going back to my speech at the Witten as well. If you decide to stay, you have to understand that you're doing it sort of to face a time of uncertainty and hardship. I mean, if you're lucky, it won't hit you until you're older, and it's going to hit your children and your grandchildren incredibly hard. And that's pretty much, at this point, unless we change something, unless the playing field changes in terms of politics, which it might, that's what you're signing up for. And anything else is just talk at that point.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the problem is, it's a difficult subject to broach, but
So stay or go, but just be aware of what you're choosing.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, I don't think there are any easy solutions. I think if you, let's be honest, if you kind of want what people in our spheres want, return to tradition, normal, sustainable life. I mean, how you do that without the imposition of force, I don't know. We can't vote our way out of this. There's no easy way around this. I mean, like mass immigration, as we're finding in the UK, this is a real problem. I mean, once these people are here, even if they are illegal, it's difficult in the current climate. It's very difficult to remove them. I mean, what are you going to do? I mean, you're going to go with SWAT teams, break down their doors, chuck them into a van and drive them to the border or the airport. I mean, how's that going to look to the normies, in the international press? There's just no easy solutions, really.
You're going to get a lot of yeses in the chat on that one.
I was going to say, it's probably okay for us. We're okay with it. I mean, we'll probably drive them there ourselves, to be honest with you. But the problem is, I mean, what's palatable for... I mean, the problem is culturally we're all over the place. We don't have a common consensus in Britain over anything, even low-level, non-partisan issues. I think it's the same in the United States, many of the Anglosphere countries, France, Germany. I don't know. I get the impression with Scandinavia, maybe you're on the road, but you're not that quite far along. The problem is our issues, our problems are pretty much built. I mean, you see this everywhere. I mean, the scenes we saw from Bald and Bankrupt, Wandering Turnip, I mean, you'll see that. I just step out of my door. I mean, I don't know if others from the UK in the chat would agree, but unless you're living in the Cotswolds or something, or, Oxford or, Bitchester, something, it's every tier 1, tier 2 city kind of looks like that. And I say it's industrialized life, globalization, it's mass immigration. There's many things that go into it, declining economic fortunes. It's very difficult. Now, of course, the other thing is with all of this, moving away from, the nuts and bolts of both microeconomics, this is impacting things like healthcare, education, transport, infrastructure, and you're seeing the decay, sort of writ large throughout the country. As I mentioned before, the government just doesn't have the budget to meet its basic obligations now. So whether it's basically a not fit for purpose NHS, not having enough houses. You said, Walrus, the quality of new builds, which I think says a lot about where we are as a country. These problems, it's not just about graphs and tables. There are real world consequences to this.
They're coming fast, right?
Well, they are, yeah. And the solutions. The problem is, we're a small country. You can drive from north to south, I think, in about 6-7 hours in the UK. You can't. Yeah. There's no Wyoming. There's no Montana. There's no Idaho in the UK.
That's one of the reasons that I'm bringing this up, because, like, say with the American situation, okay, they're not going to be able to revert demographics back to the 1950s. It's probably not realistic, but they are. I'm seeing that they are actually united now around this sort of Christian nationalist populist stuff to a very large, like, surprising degree, where you've seen changes in, like a lot of how the GOP works, a lot of the people who seem to have influence now, and like with the amount of support that Trump has, like as divided as they are, they seem to be in agreement on that, at least. And the United States is very, very big, right? It's a very big place, so they can still move into places and have space for themselves where they can exist. So like, even though, okay, like now there's like 25% of the country, 30% of the country is like Latin American, that sucks. But there's still, like, you're still not kind of crammed into this place where the economy is just going down, like gradually just getting worse, and everything is just kind of getting worse, and nobody agrees on anything. That's why I thought this episode would be interesting, because it just seems like the UK is in a peculiarly sort of precarious situation, say, compared to almost anywhere else, to be honest. So yeah, I feel with you people out there. I don't know what more to say about it.
I think, you look at the US, I think particularly, there's so many areas of Louisiana, New Orleans, Baltimore, a lot of parts of Pennsylvania, whether that's Philadelphia or whatever, where, it's like homelessness, drug users everywhere. It just looks like the zombie apocalypse. That's what it looks like. You can hardly believe your eyes. We're not there yet, but I think that's the next stage for the UK, which is all fun, of course. You don't see this elsewhere. I didn't see this in when I was overseas, and it's a uniquely kind of European Anglo-sphere kind of phenomenon. What about Norway? Does Oslo, Trondheim, do they have areas like that, which is really graffiti everywhere? And
not nearly to this extent. There are areas that are, let's call them underdeveloped, or not yet gentrified, I suppose. But it's nowhere near this level. And every time we've gone to Britain the past couple of years, I leave thinking like, wow, apparently I live probably in the best country on earth compared to that. I don't have any problems at all compared to you guys.
Because we can sit and sort of pretend like, it's bad everywhere, and we're all going to get the same treatment and blah. Well, to be honest, I'm looking at it now, I'm probably not thinking that. Even like some of the shittier areas in Norway are better looking than some of the places that we saw in the video, right?
Yeah,
so that's and that will, it's something that will compound over time as well. I don't see that it's like the sort of inevitable collapse of this kind of Scandi countries. It's like it's just right around the corner, because I have no need to try to do one-upmanship on these things. So I don't want to like paint that picture. And I think that like European countries have a lot of issues, various types of issues. Some of them are similar, like this kind of birth rate, population collapses, and insecurities with the geopolitical situation. And there's some things that are more peculiar, but like I think a lot of them are going to be able to come out of it better than the UK, looking at things the way they look now.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, it's it just looks it looks pretty grim, and
Both,
it looks as it looks.
Both
Really.
Carl Habermas and Nathan CJ Hood have expressed wishes to join Team Nordic when it goes to shit. So I think Nathan was first. In the event that it all goes, the boogaloo happens in the UK, I'll make sure to set aside a spare room for you. You can seek asylum in Norway, claim some sort of like heritage or something.
You
can marry my sister, Nathan. So we'll just have it for 2 years, and you'll just get divorced, and you'll just pay me a lump sum. Afterwards, I think that'll solve it for you.
Yeah. So yeah, it's very true. Yeah. But
all right. So we have here finally a €2 Peregrinus to Flandria. This is relevant to what we were talking about. He says you should watch No Exit by Charlemagne, which is a good video he made a couple of years ago, I think.
I think he's gone into the wilderness, hasn't he? I mean, he was one of those
kind of, yeah.
Get out of the cities a long time ago. To be fair, he's like, first and foremost, just leave these, industrialized hellholes and get out, which I think is pretty good, sound and solid advice.
On a personal level, it certainly helps to be able to sort of live with it, I guess. And as we have talked about, it is a bit easier to do in the US just because of the the space, the size.
A lot easier to do. I mean, it is very, very spacious, and most of the US populations are concentrated in the big cities, right? And so there's just, especially in the heartland, there's just massive amounts of space that you could use for projects like that, and you could probably do it for cheap as well if you have some money.
It's not to say it isn't possible to do here as well. It's just a bit more difficult. Okay, we're coming up on 1 hour 30, so I think I'm gonna round this off. I do have something absolutely horrible, low tier trash to play for everyone if you all want a bit of a palate cleanser. I guess the point is, it could be worse. You could be online cooking meatballs in a sink for TikTok money or something. Take a look at this. This guy has a channel where he pretty much just goes weird places to cook food in sinks in like hotel rooms and on planes, and it's, I mean, I guess this is just like a weird natural progression of, I know TikTok had like a thing with, people will just like dump a bunch of soap.
What the hell?
Sorry, what?
What the hell is he doing?
He's got some weird like cooking instrument. Why are you showing us this? Well, because I had to see it, and now I'm inflicting it on you guys.
I mean him, not you. No. I mean just some of the weird
no.
shit.
No, Nordhouse says, why are you showing us this?
Oh, right. Easy.
Dana O'Shea says, nothing wrong with sink meatballs, mate. Proper British scran that. I think this guy is American, to be honest.
We need to do an episode on British food sometime, I think. That's
well, I don't, when we went to the Witten, we usually are quite good food when we went to pubs and stuff like that. And I do enjoy British food. Usually when I see people like dunk on it online, it's like weird wartime stuff. Like, haha, my grandpa used to eat, bread with bread between it. Haha, this is British food. Yeah. Lovely nosh. Is it nosh? Nosh? Is that how you say it? Nosh.
Yeah, nosh. Yeah.
British food. I can't really do the accent, but it's incredibly funny to do the accent.
Well, yeah, it's probably good to end the stream on something of that.
End it on that.
Yeah. I think So,
Thank you so much, Nomad, for joining us
no,
here
it's
today.
great to be back, and yeah, I've enjoyed it. I hope the chat likes it, and yeah, that was really good. Yeah.
Do you have anything you would like to shill before we get out
I
of
mean,
here?
just just my Substack. I should say thank you to a few. I have a few donators now. So Paul, Tom, thanks a lot, guys. Really appreciate it. There'll be subscriber only content soon, and yeah, just follow me there. Follow me on X, if you like, and I'll put my link in the description. But yeah, it's everyone stays well, stays safe, and yeah, let's do this again sometime.
Great. Luddic Path, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, praxarchy.com as usual. So we got a piece up about AI, featured article. I recommend people check that out.
Yeah, it's good stuff. As for me, usually I put the link to my Twitter down below if you want to see my shit posts. And also the link to our Element chat, where you can hang out and contact people who appear on the show or just have various chats. Carl Habermas, anyone got a ciggy, mate? Oh, it's so funny. Okay.
You have to do that
Thank
with
you,
a
everyone.
British or an Indian accent now. I think you need a.
I can't do that. I can't do the Indian accent, but yes, that would be incredibly funny.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for watching, and we'll see you all next week. Have a good weekend.
No.